you'll notice the bees gathering on this branch, and that's because the pheromone is actually existing here from where the queen landed. So if you can, take that branch away. If you can't, you have to make do, but if you can, we'll simply cut that branch off so that that pheromone, we can take it away. So shake those last bees off, and we'll remove that from the area, and then the bees will now smell the pheromone from inside the hive, and they'll go and find the entrance. So you can see them starting to find their new entrance now, and hopefully they're happy with their new home and will stay. I'll leave this here at least till nightfall. If I do want to move it tonight, then I'll move it more than 6 kilometers away, so the bees don't go back to this spot. If I want to move it a short distance, I'll wait for them to settle in and then move it metre by metre as the day goes on, each day into a new position. Or there's other methods of moving hives if you want to see our Flow Hive YouTube channel and Facebook YouTube page, Facebook video page. Then we've got videos on starting in bees, moving hives, and all sorts of things for beginning in bees. Now this isn't the only way to start in beekeeping. You can also install a nucleus hive, which is basically 5 frames, a mini hive already going, and you can install them into your box, and we've got videos of how to do that as well. Another way is a package. So you can install a package of bees, which is basically an artificial swarm in the box, which you can order in the mail. And another way is to take a split. So we've got videos of all of these methods of starting in beekeeping on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. So check those out if you're interested. We've now got a new colony in the box. One last thing to check is that the hive is level in the sideways direction. Because we're using naturally drawn comb, we want that comb to go down nice and straight from the frame. If the hive's on a tilt, then what you'll find is gravity will guide that comb and it won't be straight within the frame, which makes it a lot harder to service later. Any questions?
Yes. We have a question from Louis. How do you know if you got the queen?
So Louis asked, how do you know if you've got the queen? And the answer is you don't, but keep a lookout. If you notice all the bees balling up again on the outside of the box, then you didn't get the queen and all the bees are going to her. But if all the bees are finding their entrance and it's looking good and they're mostly in the box, then you did get the queen and you're good to go. If you didn't get the queen, they ball up on the outside, simply following the same process again. Sometimes you'll have to scoop those bees into the box and hopefully you get the queen the next time. Great question. Any more questions?
Heather Marie asks, will the rest of the hive settle down and go to their new box home?
Will the rest of the hive settle down and go to their new home here? The answer is yes. The bees that you see flying around the outside are ones that didn't quite make it in the box, but they will smell the queen pheromone and they will fly into the entrance, and tomorrow you'll see them nice and calm going about their business and starting to build their comb from the frames.
Another question is, if my bees have swarmed, have I lost my queen?
Someone's asked, if my bees have swarmed, have I lost my queen? Now, what happens is, yes, you've lost the old queen, but bees are clever and they raise another queen at the same time as the old one leaving. So the colony will die out without a queen, so they will raise a new one to replace the one that leaves. And that's their natural division. So it's their natural thing to do, is to divide and make a new home, and that's the way they multiply. So it's a beautiful thing to catch a swarm, and it's a very nice way to start beekeeping. Sometimes you can put your name down with local pest control and they can let you know when people phone in about swarms. It's much nicer to catch them than pest control killing them. You'll find that there's Facebook pages dedicated to local areas. There's also clubs, and people say, hey, there's a swarm on this tree in this location. You put your hand up to go and get it. It's a fantastic thing to do. However, a little bit more effort than simply ordering some bees in the mail if you want to start that way.
Mughal asks, can any type of bee be caught by a swarm? Catch him.
Can any type of bee be caught by a swarm? The answer is no. The bees that swarm are the European honeybees, which is the bees you see here, and that's the bees that we collect our honey from. There are other types of colony forming bees. We have some little boxes just behind me here actually, that the typical way you divide them is by splitting them. It's unusual to catch a swarm with them. And a lot of the other bees you see in your garden are actually solitary bees that just lay a couple of eggs with a partner and raise those eggs in a little reed or a little piece of bamboo or whatever they find for a hole, and they don't swarm because they don't actually form colonies. But the European honeybee, it's natural way it divides. And to me this is the most exciting bee because you get a lot of honey from them, and it's a beautiful thing to both be supporting pollination and at the same time get an amazing reward if you look after your bees of honey.
Leandros would like to know, will the queen not come if she doesn't smell the pheromones?
Will the queen not come if she doesn't smell the pheromones? So it's the other way around. The queen gives off the pheromones, so the bees are attracted to her. So when the old queen leaves the hive, she actually gets pushed by half of the bees in the hive. It's a collective consciousness, if you like. It's not the queen deciding to leave, it's a group deciding to leave, and she gets pushed out. But as soon as she starts flying, those bees can see her and smell her, and they will follow her wherever she goes. So she's the important one to get into the box, and the rest will follow.
Rebecca would like to know, when should you check the swarm after you've dropped them in the brood box?
Okay, good question, Rebecca. When should you check it after dropping the swarm in the brood box? The answer is within the next few days. You should have a look and make sure they're starting to draw that comb neatly on the comb guides. Now, reason being is if they start crossways when you're using naturally drawn frames, then they will follow suit crossways, and then you've got quite a mess to clean up, and you have to rubber band things back in line, and it's a bit of work to get them going straight again. But if you can ascertain that they're going straight early, that's great. If you can just push the comb gently into line, then the bees will then follow suit by drawing straight combs after that. So it's important to check them a few days after you box them like this, and then regularly as they build. It depends a little bit. Sometimes they'll fill a whole box in a couple of weeks, and other times it can take months. So having a look will help you gauge when you might need to check them next.
Ralph would like to know can you stop swarming?
Can you stop swarming? The answer is no, you cannot completely stop swarming, but you can try. A lot of beekeepers do what's called spring management, and they open the hive, get into their brood nest, and take out a few of the frames, move them to a higher box, and replace empty frames in the lower box. They'll also make sure they're harvesting honey to give the bees plenty to do. So harvesting honey is another thing. Overcrowding is probably the main trigger. So you can add more supers to your hive or more brood boxes, whichever you want to do. The other thing that some beekeepers do is they get in there and they chop off the queen cells to mean if they're raising a new queen that they chop it off so it won't actually get to turn into a queen, that cell. It's up to you how you want to manage it. Some people really like to do a lot to stop swarming. Other people's, if they've got the time, can catch the swarm and box it like this. But it does depend on your particular location, whether you're around a lot in the springtime when bees typically swarm.
Another question is from David. Can you use the full frames instead of the blanks like you just used?
So David's asked a good question. Can you use full frames instead of the blanks like we've just used? Now what he means by that is, can you put some foundation in the frame? So in the bottom box of the Hive, we're always using traditional frames, and traditional frames actually means either naturally drawn like we've shown you, or putting in a plastic foundation sheet or a wax foundation sheet. Now our frames accommodate both plastic foundation and wax and wiring if you choose to go that way. My favourite method is naturally drawn because one, it's less work to start out, a little bit more work inspecting in the first few weeks, but that's more fun to me than sitting there waxing and wiring frames. Also, it allows the bees to naturally size the cells for themselves, which has become more of a topic in beekeeping in recent years, is letting the bees size the cells for themselves has a health benefit, and they can decide whether they want to make drone cells or if they want to make worker cells and set up their brood nest just how they want to. So that my favourite method is to keep it as natural as possible in the brood box.
Juma would like to know how long to get honey from the new hive.
How long to get honey from the new hive really depends on whether there's a great nectar flow and how strong your colony is. This was a pretty medium-sized swarm. It wasn't a huge swarm. I'm not expecting to get them to have them fill out the frames in the next week. Like we've had some swarms that we've shown you live on camera have actually filled out the entire bottom box, be ready to put the top one on in a couple of weeks. Now that only happens if you've got a strong nectar flow and a really big swarm. So the answer is it really depends. The earliest you would be expecting to get honey stored in your top box would be in that first month. The longest would be many months, and in some cases you get a poor season and you may not even get a harvest that season.
Another question from Lydia. What material are your flow frames made of, and are they bee friendly?
So Lydia's asked, are the flow frames bee friendly and what material are they made of? So the flow frames are made of plastic. We spent a long time choosing plastics that would be the very best, both for our environment, the bees, and our honey. Now that is really important to me. I'm somebody who actually doesn't like the way we use plastic in our world. If I'm down at the shop, I will refrain from buying a drink because I don't want to use throwaway plastic. Now, the other question, and you should be concerned, is there are many plastics in the world that aren't good for us. We know that. So in choosing the plastics, we put a lot of attention into that and made sure it's BPS, BPA free, and the very best food grade qualities we could have. Next, what happens is the bees coat all of that in wax. So the bees coat the flow frames in wax and then store their honey in those cells. So if you like, your honey is being stored inside beeswax, and the bees build onto the flow frame. So the bees then draw out the wax, they complete all the bits of the comb, draw out their wax, then store the honey in it. So your honey is actually being stored inside the beeswax. Plastic isn't a new thing in a beehive. Most of the honey you've probably eaten in the world has had some plastic foundation or some form of plastic contact during the honey process. What we've done is make the parts move, so to form a really useful function that allows you to gently harvest honey in a really easy way.
Lee would like to know, when should honey be harvested?
When should honey be harvested? It should be harvested when there is plenty of nectar coming in and when you know there is some more coming in for the bees. So the time to harvest is when you can see in that back window of the flow frame. If you watch some of our other videos, you'll see that beautiful view of the honey filling out, and you can watch that and go, wow, the honey's building up, the honey's building up, and you can watch them cap that, and once it's capped, it's time to harvest. Bearing in mind that if you live in a place that has a long cold winter you do need to leave honey for your bees. So we're going to wrap that up now. If you've got any more questions, please put them in the comments below and we'll keep answering them. Thank you very much for tuning in, and catch you the same time next week.